We have here a sentence, or we have here a list, a rough list on the stages or steps uh, that take one to the way toward waking up. I was hoping you could say a sentence or two about each of the steps on this list.
Okay.
So the first one is first contact, hearing of enlightenment.
Right. We take it for granted in the modern educated or industrialized West that people have heard of enlightenment, but if you really contemplate that for a bit, it's actually very rare to even hear of the notion of enlightenment. And so the Buddhists are the ones who stress this, but just to have heard of it is an extraordinary boon, right? Blessing, opportunity. So first there has to be contact with the word or the idea or a person.
The second step is resistance, not meant for me.
This is, I'm speaking here from personal experience. When I was first exposed to it, I was starting med school, and I remember feeling sad because it looked really, really interesting. I picked up Tales of the Dervishes by accident. And I remember that feeling inside me that, wow, man, that's not for me. It's not my life, right? My life is something else. And it wasn't until 15, 20 years later that book circled around and made it clear that no, your thinking was faulty. You don't have to choose between a worldly occupation and the journey, of the way. So that would be the resistance. And if people could do it for other reasons too. They could say, well, I can't do that because I have to work, or I can't do that because I have children, or I can't do that because I'm divorced, or I can't do that because I'm a Catholic, and all of those are just resistance. Okay.
The third step is suffering.
This is an interesting one because technically speaking, if you look at the literature, what they're cagey about this. They say, well, suffering's not really necessary. And it's typically the people who have very formalized and structured institutions, for example, monasteries, and again in Tibet. They say, well, suffering's not necessary. But in my experience, almost without exception, it's hard for me to think of any exception except maybe Ramana Maharshi, of people who were not either facilitated or initiated on the search because of human suffering. Now, could it be coincidence? It could be, because there's so much human suffering. But I suspect that there's part of us that wants to be free, part of us that realizes that this suffering, I mean, who wants to live a life like this, right? And so there's the suffering part. And then you think, well, wait a minute, they say that here's this path beyond suffering. What the hell? And then other people, I guess they get sick and they want long life, and they're suffering because they don't think they're going to live very long. And so they read some crazy Taoist thing that says they can be immortals or something like that, and they believe it at a childish level, as opposed to the spiritual level. And so suffering is on that list. Good, keep going, please.
Step 4 is inspiration.
Well, yeah, this is when you realize, well, wait a minute, this is for me, and actually, there is reason to think this would work, and this is something I can do. And then the inspiration is kind of like deciding, hey, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go for it. And many people don't get past the first 3 steps, right? And I don't mean to make this too linear, and it's not like that at all. It's not another what's his name, Hawkins, or who is that really, really bright guy who Wilbur. It's not another hierarchy or scale like those. All right, we've got plenty of those. So yeah, the inspiration to like, hey, I can do it. I'm gonna do it.
Step 5 is determination and difficult practice.
Yeah, so it's one thing, what they say, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so depending, on the situation, but almost invariably there are phases where you just have to sit down and do work, and it's hard to do. I got ADHD, I can't do it. Oh, I'm too busy, I can't do it. Oh, my knees hurt, I can't do it. And that's way too much to ask for somebody. You know, that's only for monks and for you know, students in other traditions. I can't possibly do that. You know, let's just meditate half an hour twice a day or something like that. Meditate an hour a day, or some mala practice or something. But then at some point you have to actually do the work, right? And then it gets easier because you learn how to do it. You become practice. It's like going to the gym. At first it may be difficult, but then it turns into, hey, this isn't so half bad. And then you get like, hey, I really want to get to the gym, you know, or running or things like that. So, and what was the word for that?
Determination and difficult practice.
Yeah, determination to accomplish some difficult. It's not that huge. It's been compared to like going to graduate school in some cases, or in other cases, professional school. You know, a few years of college, in terms of the amount of work. But that's an overgeneralization. Some people need much less. Some people may need more. Okay, but there again, determination and hard work, perseverance.
Step 6 is grace, creativity, and study.
Okay. Grace has already entered into the picture. Grace occurs when you first hear of it. Grace occurs when you give up your resistance, and there's grace that requires you to finally say, "Hey, I'm going to do this." And what grace is a word for things that we don't understand yet, we can't speak of yet, because they're outside of the human psyche as conventionally described. And so there seems to be something that comes from the outside and lifts the burden. And what used to be required dedication and hard work now becomes more joy. And then there were two other words after grace, and I'm not sure they fit there, but what were they?
Creativity and study.
Yeah, and so what comes from this is you're able to study much more easily because you're really curious. You know, you're inspired, right? Inspiration to find out what's going on. You really want to know. You got to know. And so that particular attitude is essential in this way. You know, a way to frame it is that you want truth no matter what. You want the truth, no matter what it's going to cost. You want it more than anything you've ever wanted in your life. And so then there's inspiration, and then creativity. Yeah. So then there's no program that I know of that's comprehensive enough to cover all the details that's going to go on in an individual head. And there's no understanding of an individual mind that is going to be able to cover all the weird, crazy ass things the mind does, right? You know, it's just like, it's literally insane. Ram Dass tells a story about, you know, he'd travel halfway across the world, get into this ashram he really wanted to be in, go through a lot of trouble to get there. And then, you know, they didn't eat during the day, but in the evening they had food, and he had a bag of jelly beans. And then he would get there in meditation, and he would spend like 4 hours meditating on whether or not to eat the red jelly bean or the green jelly bean first. You know, he would become obsessed with that, right? And so the equivalent, those kinds of things, right? Where the mind just gets caught up in some weird little loop that has nothing to do with anything, and it's basically just trying to, well, we won't get into what it's trying to do yet, but or there's other things where they'll say, well, you need to do in the Dzogchen tradition or in Nundra or whatever, they say, well, you need to do a certain number of visualizations. You know, you have to visualize Tara, the goddess of compassion. And you don't know how to visualize Tara. You haven't been hanging around with Tankas. You haven't been hanging around your whole lifetime with Buddhist monks. You know, you don't have pictures, etc. And then you have to get creative, right? So you have to figure out, well, wait a minute, how can I do this? And one example would be you for practice sake, you need to go to a library. In the old days, we did that. Make a Xerox copy of a picture or a line drawing, and then make copies of these and put them up all over the place. or when you're making your puja, or you're making your little meditation or study spot. There's a certain creative aspect to it that I don't think should be minimized. And what it requires, and this is the critical part, it requires individual initiative, personalized individual initiative to a point. And you should check in with somebody senior, right, or somebody who's been that way before, so you don't go too far off the deep end. But if you have the determination and you have the inspiration, then you may need to, I mean, naturally what will come along with the grace later is a creative aspect that says, hey, wait a minute, I don't have to meditate. I know the sounds of the taxis outside aren't necessarily a disruption to my meditation. They can be part of my meditation, right? I remember an ice cream truck used to come every day at the same time, roughly at the same time. And I'll always be in meditation. So from 2 miles away, I could hear that, that ice cream song, the chime. And at first it was like, oh God, it's just going to interrupt my meditation. This is awful. And then later it became, wait a minute, where's the ice cream truck today, right? And then later it became, oh, here comes the phase of the meditation that includes the twinkle, twinkle, little star, tune of the ice cream truck. And so that kind of creativity is what I'm referring to. Other creativity comes later. So I don't know if those three go together, but there they are.
Step 7 is courage.
Yeah, this one, they don't talk about it much in Tibetan traditions. They do talk about it in Zen traditions. They do, and certainly in the Toltec and the Olmec, or whatever you want to call the indigenous traditions. And in my experience, both working with people and in my own personal experience, there comes a point when courage is going to be required. And maybe it's something trivial and mundane, like people, think you're an idiot, and your friends think you're wasting your life, and what's the matter with you, or your parents are, ashamed of you because you didn't go out and, get a merit scholarship or something, some crazy thing like that. But and then as you get deeper into meditations, there are chills and spills, and there are adventures, and there come points where you need to make decisions, and you can choose to go one way, or you can choose to go the other way. And sometimes the path with heart is also the path that requires courage. And so I add that. That's my own thoughts on the matter for what they're worth. Maybe not everybody needs it. The people I've run into, and in myself, most certainly it was required.
Step 8 is resolve and effort.
Yeah, so here, you can make some progress, and you're doing well, and you can tell that your life is changing. You can tell that you'll continue to make progress if you continue to read good books, hang out with good thoughts and good people, and you get more clarity about your mind, what is and what is not your mind, and how you are different from your mind, just as you're different from your body. But then you decide, but then everything, plateaus, sort of ish. And this is where this is probably why the Bodhisattva vow is there, and all kinds of other tricks to get you to go all the way for enlightenment. Supreme perfect enlightenment, go all the way to free all sentient beings of suffering. I mean, it's crazy talk like that until you realize what they're talking about, and then it's not crazy at all. It's the most sane thing you've ever heard, right? But once you have understanding, so that's where the resolve, and what else? Effort. And effort, yeah. And then you make more effort, and then you start making the effort out of the joy of the practice, out of the joy of the journey, in many ways you've arrived because this journey is your life, right? And some caveats would fall right in here, because here's where you reach the point to where you cannot turn back for many people. You can't just pretend it never happened. You can't pretend, All right, so that's 8. How many of these are there?
14.
All right, that's good.
9 is discipline and patience.
okay, so regardless of how, dedicated you are and courageous and all this other stuff and how clear your mind is and whatever, at some point it's going to require patience. And maybe what it should say is the discipline of patience. Patience with the world, patience with the teaching, patience with the teacher, patience with the practice, patience with your body, the patience with patience, right? Because this world is more like an ocean of waves than it is like a ruler, right? It doesn't have a hard edge, and it just doesn't go in a straight line. It moves in the undulations that we see in the seasons, in the weather, in the tides, in the moods of the day, and the sun crossing and the moon crossing. So we of course are part of that. That is us, but it takes some patience and discipline to start to be able to see these patterns. I mean, you could say it's easy, right? The sun rises and then the moon rises after the sun sets. But if you really contemplate that, what you're actually saying there, even on the mundane level, the physical level of what's really happening, and in what context, then you'll see why patience is necessary, and a little bit of discipline. Not too hard, not too soft, just right. Just like anything you'd want to do. If you wanted to be a master archer, you would have to have a certain amount of discipline, but not too much, because then you'll be stiff, right? Or anxious, or worried, or preoccupied, and focused on the wrong things in the wrong measure. And so there's an art of learning how much to put on this, how much to put on that. And in this work, there's literally thousands of different minds that you need, that you use. Maybe I should say hundreds, so it doesn't discourage people. But the mind that you use for poetry is not the same one you use for calculations, right? The one that you use for calculations is not the same one you use for studying history. And the one that you use for any of those things is not the one that you do your mala with, or do your chanting, or your depending on what you're reading, you use a different mind. And this takes time to absorb. And then you get much more freedom of thinking, because you're the master of your mind now. You're not mastered by your mind. You're not the slave of your mind. You're the boss of your mind.
Step 10 is generosity and love.
Yeah, and so this is a recompense. You realize that all this time you've been hoarding things for yourself. Whether it's social credit, or public recognition, or money, or objects, or nice clothes, or whatever it is that people happen to get attached to at different ages or stages. And then you realize, well, wait a minute, it's endless. There's no need to hoard. There's everything you want is right here. It's all here, and you can't put any more here, even if you wanted to. And then you begin to realize that, wait a minute, what Jesus said is actually, it's literally true. That treat your neighbor as yourself. Your neighbor is yourself. And then you're self-aware enough to realize, well, what really gives me pleasure? Yeah, and everybody likes to get a nice gift, or a nice compliment, or a nice, acknowledgement, or something like that. But then you start to, when your mind is a little bit more clear, you can literally compare them. I mean, in a disciplined way. Well, which one is more gratifying, the giving or the getting? And then you realize, hey, wait a minute. The days at work that I feel best, well, the days that I drive home and I feel really, really good, are exactly the same days that I've been generous to someone, or I've helped someone, or I've done my part and well, and I feel fulfilled, right? And so then, instead of all this grabbing for yourself, you start to realize that it's the giving. I don't want to sound like Pollyanna. I'm not Pollyanna, right? I'm just saying that it's an observation, that it feels to do a job well, right? And to help somebody out, or to really help somebody out, or something like that, or just do something meaningful, feels so much better than just to acquire something that you think is going to be meaningful for yourself. All right, so that would be the generosity. And from that, that's an understanding of love, right? That's love operating. Love which is entirely inherent to us and external to us, if you want to call it that. Love which is synonymous with truth and God. You know, they say God is truth. It doesn't make any sense because we're using words. But once you see that, you won't unsee it. Love and God and truth are the same thing, and the way and the Tao. And so this generosity is part of the love. And again, you have to experience it. And maybe that's why it's, and some people it's easier than others, right? So that's number 9, number 10.
That was 10.
Okay, 10. Generosity and love, okay.
11 is insight and self-correction.
Yeah, and here's where you realize maybe you're going off the deep end, or maybe you've overdone something, and what you thought was generosity, you notice you only feel good if there's other people watching you be generous, right? And so you have more insight, and so you start to develop, and you start to see how you were seeing things incorrectly beforehand. And so that's insight. And what was the second word?
Self-correction.
Self-correction or self-development. Yeah, as you grow, you learn, hey, and sometimes you learn, for example, being generous to a thief by giving him a ladder is not generosity, or giving money to a drug addict that's on deathbed and just wants the money to finish himself off. That's not generosity either. And so you start to self-correct, start to get a little wisdom in addition to the love, because remember, compassion without wisdom is dangerous many times. I mean, you give money to the wrong people, even though they're hungry, and they don't use it for food. They use it to make more weapons, right? And so that kind of thing, kind of sobering up. What was the word for that? I forgot.
Insight and self-correction.
Yeah. And this is an endless process. All right.
12 is awakening and resolution.
Yeah, this is when you wake up. And I don't know that we should go much further than that, but basically at some point, the ego gets dropped. Either it gets dropped for you, like if something from the outside happens to you, and you think, oh my God, it's the end of the world, or I might as well just kill myself, or, what am I here for? And if you look at the stories of people awakening, very commonly, there are these feelings of horrible despair, of terrible, events. And I suspect that sometimes in Zen, when the teacher goes up and bangs a student with a stick in front of everybody, and the student is just the right spot, or he says this really biting, cutting, ego destroying comment, which these guys did, the masters, that not more than a few of them, they went, huh? And their ego drops out, and boom, they're there. Or sometimes in the case of some of the people, more modern people, it's at the moment when they decide, I can't do this, I quit, and they get up from the Zendo, and they just walk out, and they say, I've had enough of this, I'm not going to do it anymore, right? And then they go home to pout, and they woke up. Well, because it feels humiliated, right? Their ego's been crushed. Now I'm speculating a little bit, but that's part of it, right?
Uh-huh.
And you can't engineer these things, so don't try this at home, folks. So don't try to do it to yourself. You'll hurt yourself. But it's an act of grace. It's an act of true grace, of love. And it looks like the opposite. And so when Jesus says, the last shall come first, and the first will go last, now you understand what he's talking about. And so along those lines. And then, but after awakening, I think that gets a little bit more rarefied and more easily misunderstood. And I wonder and it's also, we're at number 12, so that's better than 13. So I wonder if we shouldn't stop there, unless there's follow-up questions.
No, yeah.
Stop
That's
there?
good.
Okay.
That's good.